Oh, I'll be brave if you're brave. I'll be brave, but only if you're brave. And it could be just you and me. We'll be family. Just wait and see.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Lung Cancer Living Room. Thank you all for joining us. Tonight's topic, we're kicking off 2021, new year, new era, ushering in a new generation of vaccines. I know that COVID has been on everybody's minds for going on a year now, and the vaccines were introduced at the end of last year. So we're going to talk a little bit about what they are, how they work, and what to sort of expect. And with us tonight, we have Dr. Amy Moore, who is our Director of Science and Research here at GoTo Foundation. I think most of you, if you aren't new to the program, have seen Amy talking on here before. She's sort of our in-house expert when it comes to COVID and lung cancer. And then we, of course, have Dr. Fred Hirsch, who's an MD, PhD, Executive Director, Center for Thoracic Oncology at Mount Sinai Center, Mount Sinai Health System, Professor of Medicine and Pathology. I'm going to mess this up. Icahn, sorry, Fred, School of Medicine, Joe Lowe and Lewis Price, Professor of Medicine, Associate Director at the Tisch Cancer Institute. Dr. Hirsch is no stranger to GoTo Foundation, and we are thrilled to have him here tonight to talk with us. Just a quick little open for those of you who are able to join us today, and for those of you who will come back and watch post live. I'm Danielle Hicks, in case you are new. I'm Chief Patient Officer here at GoTo Foundation for Lung Cancer. And those of you who may not be familiar with our living room, it's a support and education series that we created specifically with patients and caregivers in mind, with the aim of facilitating these types of educational conversations from key opinion leaders in a format like this and in language that the layperson can understand. I know a lot of folks go to the internet looking for information specific to their disease, either from a treatment standpoint or, in this case, from a vaccine standpoint. And so we're here to try to help you navigate that, like I said, with the experts in the field. So thank you for joining us live this evening. Before we jump into the topics, I'm going to ask, and then of course, Bonnie Adario, sorry. All of you know Bonnie. That kind of goes without saying. She is a celebrity, so to speak, in this space, especially with the patients and in the patient population. So she is here, as always, every month to help us co-moderate and really bring that sort of patient perspective into the conversation. Before we jump in, though, I would like Dr. Moore and Dr. Hirsch to give a little quick introduction about why lung cancer is an area of focus for you, and then we'll jump into tonight's conversation. So, Dr. Hirsch, I don't know if you want to start.
Absolutely. Good day or good evening, everyone. And thank you so much for the invitation to participate in this living room. My interest in lung cancer, it goes way back. It goes back to my student days in Copenhagen, Denmark, where I, unfortunately, through personal family experience, became interested in lung cancer. And during my medical studies in Copenhagen, I started to do research in lung cancer and have continued to do that the way through. In 2000, I came to United States. I started out in Colorado, University of Colorado, and did and focused on translational research in lung cancer. And ISLC, the International Association for Study of Lung Cancer, is an organization I have followed almost from the early beginning of the organization. An organization is very soon 50 years. So that is a long time, and I was the chief executive officer of the organization in the period of 2013 to 2018, where me and my family decided to seek new opportunities and new challenges and move to New York. And I took the current position at Mount Sinai in New York, where I am, as you said, executive director for a newly established multidisciplinary thoracic institute or center.
Thank you, Fred. So you've clearly been doing this for a little while anyway. Amy, do you want to go next?
Sure. So my background's a little bit different. My PhD is actually in virology. So that's why all this is very timely for me. But then I'm trained also as a basic cancer researcher. And then spent about a decade in Georgia working on, pan-cancer initiatives, statewide cancer initiatives that covered all the different major cancers, including lung cancer, which is a major burden for the state of Georgia. And so life brought me to California, and I had the good fortune to find the opportunity with, at the time, ALCF, now part of Go2 Foundation. So it allowed me to channel all those experiences I had working on statewide cancer initiatives with a laser focus now on lung cancer. And I think we all have those personal anecdotes of friends and family who've been touched by the disease. So the thing that motivates me is, the patients. And everything I did before was much more about building research capacity and infrastructure. And this is every day having the opportunity to learn from patients, to touch patients. And that's what motivates me. And that's the reward of what we do.
Thanks, Amy. Ms. Adario, just for those who might be new and the off chance that they don't know you, do you want to tell us a little bit about who you are?
Sure. I'm a lung cancer survivor. I think going on 17 years now or something. I don't know. My kids always correct me. That's why I had them keep me honest. When I was diagnosed with lung cancer, I was the fourth person in our family. And then my mom was diagnosed after me. So I made it a point. I made a little pact with the big guy upstairs that if I made it through the knothole, I was stage 3B and I had a tumor on my aorta. And if I made it through, I would do something to work on the stigma, because I felt that at that time, that was the one big thing that was really holding back research for lung cancer. So we did that, got into early detection, and it was just going to be this little small group of people that were working on lung cancer. But now it's a very large group of people that we have an office in Washington, D.C. and one here, and working on one, around the center of the United States. But patients first, always patients first. And when we start to talk about things, about a new project, we ask ourselves, is this good for the patient? If the answer is yes, we do it. If the answer is, well, maybe not so much, then we don't do it. So everything we do begins and ends with patients. It's my favorite thing to do.
Yeah. Thank you. And I know I couldn't be more proud of the team that I work with internally at Go2 and a lot of our external friends and partners like Dr. Hirsch and there's so many others that are helping us to get to that finish line for lung cancer patients. So thank you all for those introductions. So as I said earlier, tonight we're going to be talking all things vaccine, but I think it's important first to kind of start at the beginning. There was a lot of talk mid to late 2020 about both Pfizer and Mrna and them being sort of on this fast track towards coming up with something that would work against COVID-19. And I think it's important that we understand what those are and how they work. And I do want to remind everybody who is watching live that we have amazing Go2 team members online, both Facebook and the YouTube live streams, to answer any questions they can there. But if there's something they can't answer or something that you want to ask specifically to either Dr. Hirsch or Dr. Moore, we can get that over to me and I will ask them on your behalf. So please don't be shy. Now is your time. You've got these experts here to answer your questions. So please take advantage of that. So with that, I think we can jump right in, and we're going to start. With Amy. And can you talk a little bit about both the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are mRNA based? Can you talk a little bit about what is mRNA?
Right. So that stands for messenger ribonucleic acid. And we talk about the central dogma of molecular biology. That's this idea that DNA, which is effectively the blueprint for what makes you you, that DNA gets converted to mRNA, and then that in turn makes proteins. So that's what we learn as we're coming up through the science of this. But effectively, what that is it's just a molecule, a recipe for making a particular component of the coronavirus particle. So in this case, both Pfizer and Moderna's vaccines are mRNA encoding the spike protein of SARS-CoV-2, which leads to COVID-19. So it's just a recipe, a way of tricking our bodies into thinking that we've been exposed to the virus without us actually being infected with the virus. And I'll pause there and see if you have a follow-up to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, does anybody else have a comment before I jump into my follow-up? I tend to monopolize conversations, and I'm trying really hard. My 2021 resolution is not to do that.
It's that intermediate between DNA and protein. That's the way to think of what messenger RNA is. But in terms of the vaccine, it's effectively a recipe for causing our bodies to mount an immune response against it, to make that spike protein, which is the little things that protrude out from the virus particle when you see the cartoon representation, those little spikes. That's what we're going to get an immune response against, and that's what the mRNA allows us to do.
Do all vaccines work the same?
No. So in this case, both Pfizer and Moderna are the two vaccines that are currently approved in the United States. But there are other vaccines globally using different platforms that have been developed. So another one that people might be familiar with is the Oxford Astrazeneca vaccine, which has been approved in the UK and in other parts. And that is using an adenovirus, which is another type of virus, but I kind of compare it to using that virus as a Trojan horse. So it's not a virus that can replicate or make more copies of itself when it's introduced to your body. So it's not replication competent, but it basically just carries that spike protein message again into your body to trigger an immune response. So AstraZeneca is using this replication incompetent adenovirus vector. Same for Johnson & Johnson's vaccine that's common, the Janssen vaccine, also using adenovirus, as well as the Russian Sputnik vaccine that you may have heard some talk about. There is another vaccine that was developed by Chinese investigators that is an inactivated form of the COVID virus. So there are different platforms that all have different modalities. There are pluses and minuses to each one. I think in terms of Moderna and Pfizer here in the US, people ask me, should I get one over the other? Is one better than the other? And I always say it's 6 of one, half dozen of another in terms of Moderna compared to Pfizer. They have equivalent efficacy. They're both approaching 95% efficacy in preventing severe COVID-19 disease. In terms of how they're stored, there's subtle differences. One, Pfizer has to be kept at super, super cold temperatures. Moderna, not quite as cold, so it may give it, greater flexibility in administration and in the locations where it can be kept. Not all facilities have the super cold freezers required to keep Pfizer's vaccine at temperature. So that's a differentiator. But in terms of, is one going to work better for you than the other? They're equivalent. That's the way we need to think about them. Some of the comparisons with other vaccines that are on the market, are with Janssen's Johnson & Johnson vaccine that's coming online. It will be a one-shot regime instead of 2 shots. So, there are things like that may come online and make it easier, where we're not talking about having to come back at 21 days or 28 days, for example. So there are multiple shots on goal, which is encouraging. There are different approaches in how they're being developed. And that may give us even better coverage. And Dr. Hirsch may have perspective on this too. I think by having the mRNA vaccines, by having the adenovirus vector vaccines, by having protein subunit vaccines, by having inactivated virus vaccines, we have a comprehensive attack on the virus from multiple angles. And I think that gives us greater flexibility. You know, the issue here is simply supply right now, frankly, in the US and worldwide. So the more that these vaccines come online, that gives us greater opportunity to get more people vaccinated and get us to the point that we can get beyond this pandemic. Fred, I don't know, Dr. Hirsch, if you would like to add anything to anything I said.
No, I think you explained it very elegantly, Amy. I used to say use a very simple way to explain the mRNA. The mRNA is educating the body to develop antibodies and specific immune cell reaction to this specific spike protein. And the good thing with this mRNA thing is when it has finished its job to educate the immune system, it degrade and disappear.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So people are asking the whole time, how long time do we have this mRNA in the body? The mRNA doesn't even go into the nucleus of the cell. It stays outside the nucleus, and when it has done its educational job, it actually degrades within a few weeks. Right, Emmy? Is that
yes,
very simple?
That's correct.
Very
yes.
simple.
I think that was
Yes.
a really great way to explain it, but I think for the layperson it would beg questions, right? So just to step back for a second, we heard a lot of big sciencey words about mRNA and how these things work and you know what sort of drives what where. But at the end of the day, it's really the mechanism by which these drugs work, and they differ, Amy, and you explained that, right? So
Yes.
when we're talking about these mRNA, specifically the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines, to your point, Dr. Hirsch, we get a lot of those questions about, is it similar to like a polio inoculation where you get your series of shots and then you're done? You're immune for life, right? Or so how does this work? And I know we're going to get into some of the technology and some of the fears around getting this vaccine in general, but what are we thinking? Is it going to be an annual, vaccination, at least with what we have now?
Moderna has released some data suggesting that the immunity conferred by their vaccine lasts or has durability of at least a year. I think what everyone expects is that SARS-CoV-2 will become part of our seasonal virus landscape, meaning it will still circulate like the flu and other respiratory viruses. Now, I anticipate that we will have to get regular vaccination against SARS-CoV-2. We don't yet know if that's going to be annually or every 2 to 3 years, but this is not going to be a sterilizing immunity. So it's not going to be something where you get this one shot or series of shots and you're protected for life. Dr. Hirsch, I don't know if you would like to weigh in on that as well.
Yeah, we are moving into a field where we actually don't know the answer to the question. We don't know, as Amy says, we know that the antibodies which we have built up in the body after vaccination or after infection could last for at least for a year. But we don't have longer follow-up. So we don't know what happened after 1.5 years, after 2 years, after 3 years. So that is a question we need to study. Another thing we need to study is, does everyone react on this in the same way on the infection or on the vaccination? In other words, do we all have the same immune response? Our theory is that patients with lung cancer or other patients with cancer, they might not have the same strong immune response as so-called normal, healthy, or so-called healthy individuals. Everyone is normal, but so-called healthy individuals.
Right.
So that is something we are currently studying together with GoTo Foundation. We are studying whether lung cancer patients eventually have a weakened antibody response compared to so-called healthy individuals. We don't know the answer to that, but that is our hypothesis. And why do we say that? Why do we raise that hypothesis? But there is something we know. We know from studies that lung cancer patients who are hospitalized for COVID had a very aggressive course. That raised some alarms. Well, what is it about lung cancer patients which give them this aggressive course when they get COVID? And that is exactly what we are trying to study these days. Is it because they respond to the infection poorly compared to other group of populations? It could be. That is our hypothesis, but we don't know the answer to it. And we don't know the answer to, does cancer patients in general have a different duration of antibody response compared to so-called healthy individuals? So there is something we know, but there is a lot of things we don't know yet, and we need to study. Might be that lung cancer patients need more boosts.
Yep.
Today we are talking. Yeah. Go ahead.
And I was going to say, I think we should, maybe back up even more to Danielle's questions and then do a deeper dive on this piece of it in just a moment. But in terms of your original question, I do think this virus will continue to circulate. We now know there are 7 coronaviruses that have come into existence. So there's 4 that are kind of naturally circulating, endemic in the population. They don't really cause severe disease. Then there was the SARS outbreak in the early 2000s, and then there was the Middle East respiratory syndrome virus. And so those have SARS basically extinguished itself. MERS is not a major issue. We still hear ongoing pop-ups of infections, but SARS-CoV-2 and COVID, I think, is different. And so I think we are going to continue, even as vaccines roll out and we get more people vaccinated, we're going to be dealing with this for some time. And, there's going to be flare-ups. And that's why it's important that we get everybody vaccinated as quickly as possible. And I know you have some other questions just related to kind of some of the basics of SARS-CoV-2 and COVID before we kind of get into the deeper weeds of how this intersects with lung cancer specifically.
I think one question that patients want answered is that if they have actually had the coronavirus, should they also get a vaccine? Or
Absolutely.
do the antibodies keep them safe? That's what they want to know.
Yeah.
Absolutely, they should get vaccinated.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my follow-up questions based on some of the things I'm hearing, because I'm hearing just because you've received the vaccine or just because you've had and recovered from COVID and have antibodies does not mean you are protected for life, right? So that's what I'm hearing you guys say. I just want to make sure that the audience understands that that's sort of just sort of in the box of what we're talking about right now. And one of the other things before we move on that I don't want patients to get confused around is we keep talking about immune responses. And we talk about that a lot in other areas on the living room, particularly as it pertains to immunotherapy. So I want them to understand that we're talking about two immune responses for sure, but in two different ways, and that one is not the same as the other.
Right. So when that mRNA is introduced into your cells and you get the injection locally in your upper arm, it triggers special cells of your immune system called macrophages to, express or to make the spike protein from that recipe that it's just received, and that special cell can, kind of put it on its, outside its cell membrane and kind of show that it's expressing this, and that triggers the T cells and B cells to kind of do their thing and to produce the antibodies and also produce cellular immunity against the virus. So that's how we're harnessing the immune system, these multiple cells that protect us from viruses and other external threats. That's how we're channeling it to fight against this virus.
That's great. So I do want to kind of keep us moving through the agenda because we've got so much to cover. One of the things I want to talk about to try to alleviate or quell the fears that some folks are having about this new technology because of feelings that they could potentially be unsafe because they were rushed through the process and now they're to market. Can you speak a little bit about this, particularly how these types of mRNA vaccines have been in development for years and other diseases?
It feels like these materialized overnight, right? And we heard about Operation Warp Speed. And so people have this fear of this new technology. It's this scary sounding word, a bunch of letters. They don't know what it means. But, I'm trained as a basic scientist, and I can tell you that these vaccines are built on years of science. And before they were pursued for SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19 specifically, mRNA vaccines were already being developed and tested in clinical trials for cancer. There were clinical trials using this technology against melanoma and other tumors. It's been developed and tested against other infectious agents, so Zika and other viruses. So this isn't technology that just materialized and dropped from the sky. There is a history behind it. And, we knew enough because of that we were able to rapidly tap into all that science that had come beforehand that people maybe weren't familiar with, but to harness it and leverage it in a rapid manner in this context. So I think that's first and foremost, that even though it felt rushed, there is science behind it. But then again, Moderna and Pfizer did do or conduct large-scale phase 3 clinical trials on tens of thousands of patients. So, in terms of the vaccine safety, I think Dr. Hirsch would agree that the safety profile is overwhelmingly positive for both of these viruses. 95% effectiveness is as good as we could have hoped for, even better than I think we hoped for. And I think we cannot undersell that message that these vaccines are going to save people's lives. They are going to save people's lives. And there are scary things we hear about, allergy and anaphylaxis and this, that, and the other. It may alter your DNA or it may cause sterility. I've heard that one too. I would say maybe some of that was more prevalent in the fall as these vaccines were, rolling out. Now that they're here, I think confidence is growing. The more people that get vaccinated, I think it's and people are sharing their vaccines, as we're calling it. They're taking pictures as they get vaccinated. I think that's going a long way to reassure the public that they are safe. And that's an important message for us to convey to our community. These vaccines are overwhelmingly safe. The few adverse events that we've witnessed are rare. They are easily managed in the case of the anaphylaxis. And so that should not dissuade anybody from getting vaccinated.
And so when we're talking about some of these myths or these concerns and conversations that our patient population is having, particularly when it comes to altering DNA, I know Dr. Hirsch, you mentioned it earlier, but does that have specifically to do with the fact that because of where you said this mRNA remains versus entering the nucleus? Is that sort of how this works and how we know that not to be necessarily things people should worry about? Just trying to kind of run through it in my head.
Um, everyone is asking, does this vaccine interfere with the normal DNA we have in the cells? And at least for the mRNA vaccine, the answer is clearly no. And I think it is clearly no for the DNA-based vaccine approaches too. So I wouldn't be concerned about that. I think Amy is absolutely right. These vaccines are, I think you used the word overwhelmingly safe and effective, way more effective than you actually could hope for, to be honest. In the beginning of this development, they talked about an effective bar, like if 60, 70 would be amazing, but in the 60 would be sufficient for bringing it to the market. And now we saw the results, 95% effectiveness, and the few cases of infection in the treated group was actually very mild cases. So they are really effective. I think it is. I agree with the people who are using the word medical miracle, having those vaccines to the market within such a short time frame. I'm working with world leaders in virology at my institution, and they tell me that this development has been unbelievable quick, without cutting corners in terms of safety, efficacy. The main thing has been cutting financial corners and bureaucracy. So that is one of the reasons they have been able to move this so quickly forward. That is the words from my colleagues who are world leaders in the field, and they see that this is a process which usually could take from 5 to 10 years, something between there. So it is amazing we are where we are, and as quick as possible and as many as possible should certainly take advantage of it.
Danielle,
That's
I just
great.
want to clarify one thing that Dr. Hirsch said that I don't want people to misinterpret when he said the few cases of infection in people who've been vaccinated. In the case of the mRNA vaccines, you are not receiving infectious virus. The vaccines themselves cannot give people the infection, the virus. Now, the challenge or concern is, of course, in both cases, we're talking about 2 doses. So it is still possible within the window of that first vaccination that somebody could have become infected just prior or immediately after vaccination when you are not yet fully protected. So you, in both cases, Pfizer and Moderna, you must receive both doses to achieve full protection. So I just want to make sure for our audience who I know hang on, the words of leaders as eminent as Dr. Hirsch, that this vaccine is not going to give you the virus. That is not a concern with mRNA.
But we agree that effectiveness is 95%. It is not 100%.
Right.
So there are a few people in the study who got the infection not because of the vaccination, but where the vaccination didn't give sufficient protection.
Right.
But
yep.
even even in those few cases, they were all mild cases.
Yes.
So that means that some kind of protection has been given also probably to the last 5%.
Yes.
That is what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I
No,
understood what
that's
you meant. I just wanted to clarify for our audience.
yeah.
Or
No,
dispel
and
myths.
thank you both for the further clarification.
And
We do have a question. Oh,
and these are
sorry.
not small studies. These are large studies in
Yeah.
the vaccine world, talking about studies of 40,000 people or 30,000 people. That is really large studies in the vaccine world.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have a question coming from online, just to kind of clear up the folks with antibodies and when they should or shouldn't get the vaccine. And so the question is really based, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase here. Should they get the antibody test prior to getting a vaccine, or should they get the vaccine and then get an antibody test, or does it matter? Is it a chicken and egg thing, or is there a sort of a pathway towards the way that should, in order to receive the desired effect, I guess? Do we know?
So the question is, if someone is antibody positive, should they go ahead and get vaccinated, or should they wait a little bit longer because they have some level of protection already?
Or
I
do
would
they
say,
need to know their level of antibodies prior to getting the vaccine? Like if they're already protected, is it okay for them to wait to get the vaccine?
my opinion, and Dr. Hirsch can offer his as well, is you should not wait to get vaccinated because, the protection conferred by natural infection, as he just said earlier, it may last many months, it may last a year. We don't know how long it's going to last. And there have been rare cases of reinfection. So I think, we want everybody to get vaccinated when it's their turn. I think that's a key piece of this as well, given the challenges around current availability. We want to get our most vulnerable patients vaccinated first, but I would encourage everyone to get it. And I don't think we've built it into the system to do what you're saying, to test people's antibody levels or antibody titers before they get vaccinated. Our system, I don't think could handle that, honestly, and there's variability. So I think it's just get vaccinated when your age group, your category comes up. We encourage you to get vaccinated. Dr. Hirsch?
I totally agree with you. I totally agree.
Another question came in, and then I do want to get into some of the work that we're doing independently and collectively around all of this. But a question came in, and it was on the back of my mind, and I was like, wow, that's yet another whole other living room all on its own. But given the speed with which we were able to get this done, right, in under a year, we were able to come up with 2 drugs, 2 vaccines for COVID-19. How do we apply the lessons that we learned there to speed up breakthroughs for lung cancer, or getting drugs to patients quicker for lung cancer? And again, that might be a whole other living room and topic of conversation, but I think it's relevant, and I think it's on the minds of a lot of patients thinking they got a vaccine in less than a year, and we're waiting years upon years, to your point, Dr. Hirsch, to get these drugs from the bench, to the patients.
I think it could be valuable just to have my virology perspective on that question, and then Dr. Hirsch's thoracic oncology perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I think the challenge, or the reason we were able to move so rapidly in the case of this virus, is viruses are very simple organisms. They're not live in that they must infect a host, and that's how they replicate themselves, make more copies. So they're really just packages of proteins and some form of nucleic acid, DNA or RNA. Very simple. And that's an easier nut to crack in some regards than cancer, which is a very complex, multifactorial disease, an accumulation of multiple mutations impacting very varying cellular pathways. So I hear what the patients say, and I share their frustration that, it feels like all this money and manpower has been harnessed and directed toward this goal of, developing a vaccine for COVID-19. It may be an oversimplification. There may be pieces of the lung cancer fight that we can accelerate, but it's not an apples to apples comparison. And I say that with great, frustration myself and appreciation for our community. Dr. Hirsch.
Yeah, I agree. There are differences between virus and cancer, but I think there will be some synergy in the development after this pandemic. I do believe that the mRNA approach will be much more in focus also for cancer in the future.
Absolutely.
I do believe that the pandemic has learned us and FDA and NCI and other vital organizations that there are things in our development process for new drugs which can be changed or modified. And I think we had to modify some processes in this pandemic period. And I think some of those modifications, it can be approval processes for FDA, it can be financial processes from NCI and others, it can be telemedicine, it can be other things. I think we have learned something here which can be useful in the future for our cancer patients. But having said that, Danielle, I do believe we are in many ways privileged in the lung cancer field and in the cancer field to have seen, in my opinion, a dramatic progress over the last few years. So I think we are not satisfied. We are not satisfied before every cancer patient can be cured, but we have seen a tremendous progress we should be proud of, and we should continue to see this progress. And your organization is dealing with ALK survivors, you're dealing with EGFR survivors, you're dealing with NTRKers. They will verify that we have come far, long way within relative short time, and we will continue to do this. But to the question, yes, I think the pandemic, and I think what we learned from this development with COVID will transform a lot of aspects in our own cancer drug development.
I agree 1,000% with you, Fred, and you, Amy, as well. I think it's a miracle that we are where we are today with the vaccines that we have at hand and more to come and everything. I think if we've done anything that hasn't been excellent, it's the processes and getting the distribution systems involved and all of that preparatory work to actually get these vaccines delivered while we continue to improve the science and make it better and better and better. So, I think it's multi-tiered, and let the science people do the science, and then bring in the right people to do the processes and the distributions, and we'll be fine.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that we were having a little pre-conversation prior to going live tonight, and everybody on this panel tonight have very strong opinions about the distribution process and some of the things that could have and should have been done better. And I think one of the things I want to go back to the why do things take so long in lung cancer and in cancer treatment? And I think one of the things we have to recognize and sort of point out is funding. The funding, for lung cancer, particularly federal funding, we need money. We need more money, right? We just got back up to our 20 million at the end of 2020, which is a huge success, but it's not enough, right? So we need more.
Right.
And also, I think we have to look to the percentage of patients who participate in clinical trials. As you stated, Dr. Hirsch, these trials were filled fairly quickly with tens of thousands of patients, right? So it was easier to kind of get to the end of the line faster. And so I think those are two things that are also factor in, and our community needs to know. We are constantly encouraging patients to talk to their physicians about clinical trials as an option for at some time during their treatment.
But on that point, only about 4% of the clinical trial participants for these trials were cancer patients. And that feeds into, I think, some of the ongoing struggles and challenges around, our current collaboration, which is calling for prioritization of patients with cancer for vaccination against COVID-19. There were, I think, rightfully so, concerns about this new technology and how it may impact patients with cancer and other comorbidities. But I think universally now we're seeing these calls by all the leading oncology societies that, patients with cancer should be vaccinated. It's safe for them to be vaccinated. So yes, we need more money. We need more people participating in clinical trials. But that was one of the things that probably is negatively impacting our community in terms of these vaccines, is that there was so little representation of patients with cancer in these clinical trials.
That's great.
But having said that, I totally agree with you. We need more patients in clinical trials. We need more money. But might be we also need to do clinical trials more smoothly. Efficiently. That is the right word.
Exactly.
Again, I do believe the pandemic has learned us something in all those aspects, and I do believe that the approval process and the clinical trial process and even the financial process will change after this, and the way we are working together. We
Yes.
need to break down every barrier.
Exactly.
We need to break down every barrier.
Exactly.
We need to work together, come together, and forget all the barriers and see we have one goal. One goal, as rapid as possible, and
Exactly.
to that end, I would like to say, and while Amy is here and while Bonnie and Daniel Go To Foundation, in the early beginning of this pandemic, we realized the importance of working together. We said we need to come together, and we did. We brought people in, we invited people in, academia, patients, advocates, organization, FDA, NCI, and we meet every second week, and we discuss how can we work together to reach the goals together as soon as possible. And
that's a perfect segue. Yeah, that's a perfect segue, Dr. Hirsch. And I know we've got a little less than 15 minutes, and I really, really want to get information out to our community about some of the work you're doing. You out there in New York are a recognized authority on lung cancer, and together with Dr. Paul Bunn, who I believe is still out in Colorado, and Dr. John Mrna out there in Texas, have co-founded the COVID Lung Cancer Consortium. I believe it was in early 2020. Can you talk a little bit about the purpose of the CLCC?
Yeah, and that is exactly what we talked about. We realized there needs to be a forum where we can come together as quickly as possible to discuss what are the emerging challenges and how do we together overcome those challenges. We invited FDA, we invited NCI, we invited patient advocacy organizations. We need to sit around the table together and see how do we figure this out as quick as possible. And that was very simply the whole idea with the COVID lung cancer consortium. And results has come out. We have agreed to do studies together. We have applied for funding together, and we have got it. Last week, we discussed how can ASCO and other organizations come together to look into clinical management and clinical trial perspectives. How can we do it better? And several organizations jumped up on the table and said, we want to be a part of it. We want to be a part of it. And that is exactly what we need.
I agree.
We can't keep doing the same things over and over again and expecting new results, right? If you just think of, bringing in other partners as well, even outside healthcare, and, FedEx, I'm constantly amazed at how uncomplicated and smooth FedEx gets through the day. They can get a letter from Cuba on your desk tomorrow morning. So there are people out there that are real good at distribution. We in advocacy and science shouldn't be trying to figure that out. We need to bring in the people that can, right? Pull the right teams together so we can get this done.
Yeah, and that's why I think partnering is so very important. Can you talk a little bit, Dr. Hirsch, both you and Amy, about the grant that GoTo is participating in, how Amy's supporting that effort, what the project is? I know we kind of touched on it, but a little bit more detail about what it means to examine those antibody responses to the SARS-CoV-2 infection, particularly as it pertains to patients with lung cancer.
Dr. Hirsch, I'll let you talk about our NCI grant.
Yeah. So we came together and applied for this amazing opportunity. And the background is, or the hypothesis was very simple. We saw the data that unfortunately at an early period of this pandemic, the fatality rate for lung cancer patients hospitalized for COVID, more than 30% of them died of COVID. And that is unacceptable numbers we had to deal with at that time. Now, I think the situation today is different because we do have treatment options and other possibilities. But that was the data generated in the beginning of the pandemic. But that raised the hypothesis that lung cancer patients has a different and weaker immune response to the infection than other people. So we invited the virology experts to this communication, and they came up immediately and said, let us find together, let us apply, and let us study the antibody response in 1,000 lung cancer patients and compare it with 1,000 so-called healthy individuals. And that is basically what we did together with GoTo Foundation and together with other academic partners. And that is what we are doing these days. And of course, that can tell us something about antibody response and duration in lung cancer patients. But still, we have open questions.
Mm-hmm.
How does treatment affect response to infection or response to vaccination? And how do specific treatment affect? How does chemotherapy affect response? How does immunotherapy response is affected by how is the difference in response? So there are a lot of open questions we need to pursue, and we are in discussion with NCI these days how to make those approaches, how to design those studies. It seems to be in a fortunate situation that today there seems to be financial support available, but we need to figure out how do we do those studies so effective and so smoothly and so correct as possible. And that is a process we are in currently.
I think the question, Danielle, is what does that mean for our community? So one, why do lung cancer patients suffer such worse disease and outcomes and heightened mortality? That's a key question. Two, the implications of our study would suggest possibly, that patients with lung cancer may need additional vaccinations. So more, maybe not just 2 shots, maybe there would be data to support additional shots for this community, or different approaches for managing, vaccination. And that's a key feature of our grant compared to, it's part of a larger initiative that NCI has called the Serological Sciences Network, or SERANET. And that's the largest coordinated effort nationally to understand the immune response to this virus. And so a key feature of ours, compared to the other 25 awards that are part of this, is by design, we built in a vaccinated and an unvaccinated cohort. So there will be learnings that we get from this as the vaccines roll out. In both arms, lung cancer patients and healthy controls, will have people who are COVID positive, COVID negative, who've been vaccinated, who have not been vaccinated. And all that will lead us to new understandings and new findings that may suggest alternative approaches for how we approach this disease. How does the immune response work in this population, this vulnerable population? Because as Dr. Hirsch pointed to, this is a convergence that our community cannot afford. It's a respiratory virus. Our patients are already, at risk because, they have lung cancer. So it's a huge opportunity. It's, a great collaboration. And GO2 is supporting this by helping recruit patients across special populations of interest, underserved communities across our, now roughly 800 centers of excellence nationwide. So we have the depth and breadth of reach to allow us to tap into different communities where there's a high COVID prevalence, where there's a high lung cancer burden, where there's geographic diversity and other components. So we're normalizing these arms both for age and sex and gender and smoking status and all those things, but it will give us important information that can hopefully benefit our community.
That's great. I can't thank you guys. Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that's where artificial intelligence comes in, by taking down all of this medication, all of this information when the patient, even patients that aren't in trials, because data begets data. I'm having a vaccination tomorrow. I would have loved to have filled out a piece of paper that, I put my different diseases down and all of those things. So, everybody, I think, wants to be part of the solution. So we can do it in many different ways and do it faster and better. Yeah. But we need software.
I do think that's one thing that you raised before, Bonnie, in talking about FedEx is, maybe advocacy doesn't have a role to play in the distribution, but we do have an important voice to raise in calling for prioritization of our patients for vaccination against this virus. And all patients with cancer are at increased risk, with mortality ranging from 15 to 30+%. And so, we have to come together and use our collective voices, and, ASCO and AACR and SITC and ESMO and, many others are now lifting their voices to call on our leaders, to call on CDC, to call on state health departments and governors and those in positions of influence to call for this protection of our most vulnerable populations. And that's where we have a role to play. All of us have a role to play. And I think that's something where Dr. Hirsch and I have also been collaborating along with the COVID Lung Cancer Consortium in trying to protect our community.
That's great. I would love to continue going on and on and on about this, and I think we will and we should with a follow up. And I would love, Dr. Hirsch, to have you come back and maybe 6 months from now or so, and kind of revisit where we are then and what improvements have been made and what lessons we have learned. I cannot thank you guys all enough for your so valuable input. And for those of you who may still be watching online, if you have any questions related that you weren't able to get answered tonight, please feel free to reach out at support@gotofoundation.org, and we can help get you the answers to the questions that we didn't get to. I know a couple of them came in online. So I'm going to close out with some housekeeping. If you are a lung cancer patient, or if you're at risk for lung cancer, or if you know someone that has and you think that they could learn something from GoTo and some of the things that we have to offer, please let them know about us. And if it's you and you need help or you want to share your story, please contact us at the same email address I just gave. It's support@gotofoundation.org. We are here to help with any of your needs. And if we can't provide the help that you're looking for, we most definitely have partners and resources out there that we can point you to. Another exciting thing is Bonnie's book, which I know we've talked about in the past, called The Living Room, A Lung Cancer Community of Courage. It is available for pre-sale on Amazon, so you can find more information there, or of course back on our website at gotofoundation.org. Our next living room, I'm excited about this. We're kicking off 2021, I think, with some really great information. So not only this and what's been on everybody's mind with the COVID and the vaccine, but on February 16th, we're going to walk you guys through GoTo Foundation's sort of strategic focus and how we plan on doubling down on survival. And that means a lot of things for a lot of people. But we would really love to share with you guys what we've got going on, in particular over the next 5 years. And we are going to have a spotlight on advocacy, because our summit, as many of you know, is coming up in March. Events have gone virtual, or stayed virtual, I guess. Our Step into Spring virtual STEP challenge is on March 20th, and we're going to be challenging 5 communities to log 1 million miles each for lung cancer. Those communities include Southern California, Sacramento, California, Gainesville, Florida, Phoenix, Arizona, and then Jog for Jill in Berkeley. And you can also find more information about that on our website. As always, for the latest news and most recent joint statement on COVID and lung cancer, which I have mentioned to you all before, you can also find that on our website at gotofoundation.org. Please consider joining our registry. You heard Bonnie talk, and Fred and Amy talk about, and me talk about participating in research. And we do have a registry online that we would love to have more people participate in, and that's lungcancerregistry.com. And I will end with my thank yous, and the most important thank yous are to our panelists, of course, and all of you watching live or post-live, and Peninsula Television for helping us to be able to manage this program and continue to bring it to you in a way that hopefully you guys are finding meaningful. And then, of course, we could not do this without support from our sponsors. So A huge shout out to Amgen, AstraZeneca, Bristol Myers Squibb, Foundation Medicine, Genentech, Lilly, Merck, Novartis, Regeneron, Sanofi, and Takeda, as well as Janssen. Thank you all for your support and
Sure.
really finding the value in supporting what we're doing here. And with that, I'm going to say good night, and we'll see you guys next month. So thanks, everybody.
Oh, I'll be brave if you're brave. I'll be brave, but only if you're brave. And it could be just you and me. We'll be family. Just wait and see.